person doesn't respect this, for example. But if you're annoyed that the person doesn't respect this, it means that you believe respect has an absolute value. It means that you think that there's an absolute truth about respect, because if you really believe there's no such thing as big T truth, you wouldn't be worked up that somebody did something or thought something, right? If you look on social media, which is enough to raise my blood pressure usually, and you get like the virtue signaling or whatever is going on, whatever virtue is being signaled by anybody, means that they really believe that that virtue is true, or they wouldn't be worked up about it, right? How many things do you get worked up about that you don't believe, right? Like if somebody were to just be like, yeah, there's like shortage of sheep in Calgary, right? I don't know that many of you guys would be like, no, like that's ridiculous. Like you wouldn't be upset about it because you don't care about it. Like you don't believe it. People only get worked up about things if they believe something, right? Otherwise they wouldn't. And so when people are singing songs, that's what I was using songs. And I was using songs not just to talk about the dogmatic aspects, like the not Lecrae, Macklemore songs, but also the sexual songs, because I was trying to make a point that by saying this is the right expression of sexuality or the good expression of sexuality, you're asserting a belief. You're asserting a truth. You're telling somebody this is what it's supposed to look like. So I wasn't arguing about whether the supposed to in their view is right or wrong, as much as to point out that everybody is pointing out at something that they believe is absolute truth. And so the claim of absolute truth is not only, it is always a religious one, even though socially, it might always be understood that way. In the sense that even atheists are very religious about their atheism and might not realize it sometimes. And so they're pointing at a shape of what they are calling truth and defending it. And that's exactly what the theist is doing. The difference between the atheist and the theist is which shape they're pointing at, in their minds anyway. They might actually often be pointing at the same one and not knowing it. But if we're looking for that truth, then to use that analogy that we were talking about, is that we're all pointing at this object that we think exists called truth, and that we might be debating what we think about it, what we see, all these different things. And so if I am actually trying to just know this truth, I shouldn't be so worked up about everybody's thoughts and opinions if I actually am looking for the truth. Right? And contemporary society doesn't seem to be going that way. So I would challenge you all to ask, do I get worked up when someone has a different view than me? I was studying at a Catholic seminary the last 2 years, and like there was a girl in the class that went off like with the virtue signaling. I was thinking my grandma, like she's so dumb, like she's so lost, she's like Middle Eastern. And so like she just doesn't get yet that like anybody who thinks like this needs to like wake up, and oh my gosh, and I was sitting there being like, you're not addressing whether or not what your grandma said is true, right? You're going straight from, because she disagrees with my views, she's antiquated, stupid, unenlightened, closed-minded. But actually the person who is showing the closed-mindedness right now is the person who's mad that another person has a view, right? Start with the question always of, what is the truth? Start there. Because if you start there, then you won't be worked up about other people saying things. So that was the point of last week, was to get to that concept, right? It was not asserting which truth is the truth, capital T, but that we agree in it. I've only met one person in my life whose view has since changed. Only met one person in my life, and I've talked to a lot of atheists, especially because I was almost one myself. But I've never met anyone other than this one person who changed her mind when she realized what she was saying, that said, there is no such thing as truth. That would be the truest atheist, Okay, like the truest atheist would be the one who can actually say, actually, there's no such thing as absolute truth. That would be the truest form. That's why most people who identify as atheists are probably varying degrees of agnostics, but not true atheists. But I want to talk about something else today. Again, all this is going to sound kind of like fluffy for the next like couple of talks, only because I want to set the foundations before we even get to religion. Okay, because these are concepts that without which that if we don't get them, then we're just like saying random things to each other and singing kumbaya. So the questions that I'm going to be asking around today are, I'm not looking for a particular answer. I'm not looking for you to try and answer me only religiously. I want you to answer honestly. And if that includes religion to you, cool. And if it doesn't, no problem. Like last week, I'm going to sometimes play devil's advocate. So I might agree with you and still rip you apart. And so just don't be offended if I do that. I will try not to, so that I'm not too aggressive. I want a show of hands of how many of you think it is true that you can say with conviction that it's true that where the Spirit is, the Holy Spirit is, there is freedom. Sorry? Say again? Okay, how many of you would agree with this statement? Where the Spirit of God is, so like being the Holy Spirit, there is freedom. So around 5 or 6 are confidently, and then there's a little bit of like, right? Okay. I used to make the mistake when I would do this of telling them that as a verse because then I would feel guilty if they didn't say yes. Because no one wanted to disagree with St. Paul. Okay, so question number 1. And a lot of my questions are very intentionally vague. Okay, so that things can go where they need to go. So like when I'm asking you like that's vague, I don't get it. Like it's on purpose. Are we free?
Yes.
Okay. So is free will a sign that you have freedom? Okay. Okay.
We have been given the opportunity of freedom. But
it's my phone. Sorry.
We have been given the opportunity of freedom, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are free because you have to choose freedom. And in order to choose freedom, you have to choose obedience to absolute truth and not obedience to self, which is the following passion.
So you're saying freedom is obedience?
Yes.
Interesting. You in the back, sorry. Actually, in the next few weeks, if we can do name tags and tell them people's names would be good, so that I'm not calling some people you and others by their name because I feel so guilty. You said no. Why no?
I believe like knowing religion for a second, there's a field called psychology that can get trends in how people think. So using the absolute truth, there's like a way we are created to think that kind of means like that can also be influenced from the outside. So we aren't truly free of outside influence.
Okay, so not free of outside influence. So then, does that mean that I'm not actually free? Or does it mean that I'm not? Okay, in your answer, is it possible for somebody to ever be free?
That comes back to religion, like in Christianity, like we believe that Christ sets us free by allowing us to within his realm of like like within his, like he allows us to be set free with him. Like that's what the vision says.
Okay, so you're giving a limited freedom too. So you're saying that the freedom is in whatever bounds that Christ puts.
Like I believe he removes the bounds of sin. Like the sin is like how we are programmed, if you will.
Okay.
Like he says, I'm gonna take that away from you. You can be free alongside me.
Okay. So you're saying that the freedom is a liberation from something. So then does anybody think that we're actually just free? Okay, can you explain? What's your name again? Sorry? Layla? Okay. Why are we free? Okay. So we're narrowing this a lot to God, which is cool. But let's say there's no God. Are people free? Okay, so you're saying yes, and someone's saying no. Why are you saying yes? Okay, so then is freedom, this is good, this is actually part of where I wanted to go, and I'm glad there's disagreement. Is freedom just the ability to do whatever one wants? Like when most people say, dude, I just want to be free, what do they mean when they're saying that? Mauro and then Peter.
Well, freedom, basically, like when we went back to it, it's liberation. So you can't be bound to anything. So not even yourself.
So if freedom and liberation are the same thing, why do they have two different nouns? And liberation. I'm always going to come back to nouns. So there's clearly two words that exist. So if they were the same thing, we wouldn't need two words. So no, so what Mauro is saying is that the freedom is this liberation from something. So I'm just saying, well, then our freedom and liberation is the same thing.
Liberation is the process of freedom is the state that you provide.
So then what's the freedom? Because we're talking about right now, so it seems that, so what Layla was saying is that freedom, if I'm wrong, correct me, is being able to do whatever one wants. Whereas what some of you are saying, freedom is being liberated from something. So then my question is, what is freedom? And for those who are saying it's liberation from, my question is liberation from what?
In politics, there's a difference between negative freedom and positive freedom. So that might help make a good distinction. Negative freedom is just being left alone and having just choices to do whatever you want. Or positive freedom is a realized freedom where you are freed from constraints that kind of don't allow you to achieve a truer, higher purpose or calling in your life. Instead of just being like, you have whatever choice to do whatever you want, I'm just going to lead you to your.
So freedom is designed, is according to some higher purpose?
Yes.
Why? Because I'd be more inclined to agree with Layla and say, like, who cares if I don't care about a higher purpose? Am I not free?
As rational free creatures of free will, when we choose something, we don't just choose it randomly. It's not just a matter of, I want Pepsi or 7-Up. It's a matter of what direction do I actually want to go and where's that vision headed towards on a higher thing.
So you're saying that if I don't care about that, I'm not a higher rational creature?
You're not using that faculty. You're not trying to.
So freedom has to incorporate into it my higher faculty? It can't just be that I just want to go to Alaska today?
That's a very low level kind of freedom. I'm not saying it's not freedom, but it's.
Yeah, so I want to get what freedom is. I don't care what levels. What is it? What does it mean to be free? Go for it.
I kind of go back to what you said about like your intention of being big. So like you could consider freedom like enlightenment, like what is good, what is bad in the world, like what is truth kind of thing. You could think of freedom as your own personal, like natural, like sinful behavior, like that you're trying to repress or like freedom in a sense of like an oppressive government or oppressive like culture you live in. So when you say like, do we have freedom? Like really depends on which freedom you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's like the basis of like, if I think of like the root of freedom, it's like free will. It's like I can choose what I want, like what I want, how I want to think. Obviously, you're influenced by like outside factors on that, but the original question of like, do we have freedom through the Holy Spirit? I would say yes.
So I'll play devil's advocate. If the Holy Spirit is saying don't sleep around, don't retaliate, don't, which some most people associate with religion, is that really freedom?
Well then, yeah, I go back to like, there's different forms of freedom. Where like, you're talking about freedom to make decisions and actions, like, yes, that's not freedom, but if you want the freedom to like have a happy life and do what will make you like your like soul feel fulfilled and like good, that's freedom in that sense.
Okay. So then freedom in the sense of doing what everyone wants. Does that exist, Marie?
I kind of feel like when we view it from that point and saying that, like, if we are to do and sleep around or to do what like society is normalized to do, is that really freedom? Is what I question. Is doing everything that everyone else does, is that freedom, or is that being bound to something?
So what do most people mean when they say, I just want my freedom?
I don't think most people know what they're saying.
I agree completely, but I actually think Linda's right. I actually think most people, that's what they mean, is I want to be able to do whatever I want to do. Miriam, say.
I'm gonna go on here.
Okay. So then I guess let me rephrase. Let's go with the secular sense of doing whatever one wants, okay? Does that exist?
I would argue it does not, since let's say I want to hate you and you don't want to be here. One of us can't hear it.
Excellent.
The way that I think about it is to consider the opposite of freedom, which is slavery. And from a secular sense, when we think, well, I just want to be free to do whatever I want, what we don't consider is that is me willingly choosing the slavery to my desires. So it's not true freedom.
Okay. So then true freedom would be having, in your view, not having apatheia, not having any passion for anything.
Not having attachment to passion.
Okay. And how did you arrive at that definition?
Because of the fact that the biggest thing that separates our fallen nature from God is our ego. And God is egoless. And what creates an idol between us and God and separates us from freedom is our ego, which is the desire to feel oneself and be living for oneself, which is in itself slavery.
Okay, so you define freedom through God.
Yeah.
Okay, so in your model, there is no freedom outside of God.
Yes.
Okay, anyone disagree with that? Go for it. Okay, no problem. Okay. We're going to come to that because that's actually where I want to go with it. So you're like bang on with this. Okay, but I'm going to throw really stupid questions and they have a point. Okay, so if you're in a relationship with someone, are you afraid if you sit and talk, or do you always need to stand up? I think this is complete nonsensical. Okay. Like, I know it sounds so dumb. Okay. I almost don't want to. when you're talking to someone, do you feel like, oh my gosh, we need to sit down, or like, are you allowed to stand up?
What if you're standing up?
That's okay. But I'm just asking. So there's some things that we don't have a view on. Okay. Now, if I believe that I can do whatever I want, you guys are just a more enlightened crew. You don't seem to care that much about freedom overall, which is very new to me. If you choose to marry someone, are you also not choosing to marry the rest of the world? Like, is your freedom now limited? Is your freedom now limited because you have married a person? Yes. I won't spend too much time. Like, I don't even have a marriage talk. It's like, no, you are not free to do whatever you want. And the reason why I'm asking that is saying, do we not limit our own freedom? Why? That's so circular.
Well, I was thinking of it from like a social standpoint, in that like but he was talking about like psychology and how, from what other people say around us kind of constructs already our limitations in choice. So I think we do limit ourselves from other people's gaze.
Okay. But again, this is all subjective.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I think no matter how you look at it, whether from a religious standpoint or secularly, there is no way to be completely free all the time for every option. You have freedom of choice, but you have to choose. You have to choose something, anything. And once you choose something, then you limit your freedom in some way to whatever options you didn't choose.
Okay. I don't disagree with that. This is a non-contentious group. Usually many people do. Which might make me skip a whole bunch of things. Because there's no issue here. Does anybody believe that there is such thing as outward freedom? That outwardly, like his interior is a whole other world, but that outwardly that I can actually do whatever I want. What's the law? You brought up the law.
Like parameters, like.
So what does a parameter mean? What actually, literally, we use this language about God. What does it mean to circumscribe something? To limit it. It means I am curbing freedom. That's actually why when we call God the uncircumscribed logos, we're saying this uncontainable, this completely free, this thing that you cannot close in any way. So the law is, society is saying, you're not free. Like that's actually what we're saying, right? And so like when we use words like the land of the free, I'm like, I don't know what that means, right? I don't, like, when I mean, it's like, what does that mean? I can't actually say whatever I want, right? Yeah, but then it's because it's not defined, because everyone has been talking about something relative, including the religious people. Yeah. Greed. So if there's a societal consequence, then are you free? I agree with you, and I like what you're thinking, but let me ask you another question, okay? So someone's high-riser or high-rise, whatever it is, I still don't get it right. Someone's tall building is in blocking my view of the sunrise. I'm gonna blow it up. Sorry? I could physically do it. Okay. Perfect. So if there's a consequence, no, and you're on point. If there's a consequence, and that's exactly where I had originally was hoping it would go, because I think that that's what some people confuse freedom for, right? Is this of having something inconsequent. Could I make a decision to cut off my hand? Yes. But could I cut off my hand and still have a functional hand? So then do I have the freedom to have a handless functional hand? Excellent. Excellent. No, this is exactly where I wanted to go. I know, I think there's a lot of times where it sounds like we're stating the obvious. It's because we don't always connect the obvious to reality. We just kind of ignore it. So let's talk about socially. So you're right, there's laws that govern. So I might be allowed to make the decision, but there might be a consequence, okay? Now, socially, could some kid, I mean, this might be so much more socially acceptable than it was 20 years ago, decide to dress up as like a dinosaur in high school every day and go to class? I mean, he could. Socially, would that be considered acceptable? That's what, like, today I'm like, this whole other can of worms, like it might be okay, but in my day that was not okay. Okay, and if you did, you'd be ridiculed. There'd be a social repercussion, even if not a legal one, right, to a decision like that, right? And so when people talk about the freedom to do whatever they want, on some level, sometimes they can, maybe physically, not always, right? That's why I use the example of the hand to say, actually, I can't say I want to be able to fly. I actually really wish I could fly. Like, that would probably be my superpower, but I can't. Why not?
That's why you're like the hand example. It's like that's why they call them like the laws of physics. Like there's a reason they use the word law.
Where do laws come from? You're making my point for me. That's why I didn't know, like, for real, and I'm glad, because I intentionally wasn't defining the freedom because of how loosely everybody uses it, not knowing what it actually means. Does freedom mean being allowed to make whatever choice? Does freedom mean making whatever choice and having no consequence? Does freedom mean being rooted in something, right? And everybody's been answering from different scopes, and that's why I'm glad that you're pulling it out, because that is the issue. That's why I left it vague. Right, for it to come out naturally that people are always saying random things. So there's an order to this. Last week we talked about truth, to say that everybody is speaking relatively. But to speak relatively means you're pointing at an absolute. That's what relative means, right? And so then it begs always the question of what is the absolute? What is the law? What's your name again? Nick? Okay, which is what Nick was saying, of saying there's a law. Right? And so anybody that's speaking about freedom in some way, religious or not, there's still some law that they're pointing at that they might be ignoring completely, but exists in their mind in some way, or that wouldn't be a thing. Whether it's the law of nature, whether it's the law of the land, whether it's the social law, whatever it is, there's these absolutes in people's heads that they're referring to, not knowing they're referring to, and I'm using language of freedom relatively, right, or circularly, no offense here, and then no one knows what the heck they're talking about, right? And so, and then we'll get into arguments of saying, well, you can't say that you're restricting the freedom, but we all restrict everybody's freedom all the time. You can't actually do whatever you want. You can physically do certain things, but even physically, you can't necessarily do whatever you want because you're governed by the law of physicality, right? Where I can't have my handless working hand. It's a contradiction of nature, so I can't, right? I can't just blow up my neighbor's house, and I physically could, but there would be repercussions, right? Laws are themselves saying, we're gonna make up rules. We're gonna make up absolutes. If we can't agree on them, we'll make them up. Here's our new absolutes, folks. Go for it.
Sorry. Are the laws then like derived from the absolute truths that we were talking about last week? Like, is that what we're trying to get at? That like the laws that come from truth are what govern our freedom, or like the law thing? I'm confused.
Okay, the law thing I could spend a long time, but I won't because this isn't like poli-sci. I would love to go there, but I will suffice it to say that part of the reason why we're so divided in North America is because for the first time in history, you have all of these different people of different beliefs, different backgrounds, different heritages, different cultures coming together who don't have a common law. They don't have a common natural law. And so the end result among humans is that we're going to fight over whose law will win, right? And so that's why there's all that conflict, because everybody is avoiding the real underlying dilemma that we don't know what absolute truth we're pointing at. That's the underlying problem, right? And so regardless of where you stand and what your beliefs are, what your political views, I don't even care. But it's saying that if you don't recognize that you're pointing at an absolute truth, you're speaking a language of freedom that is based on an absolute truth that we don't agree on while we're pretending that we agree, right? So that's why part of the point of last week was to point out that contradiction, right? Like there's a purpose to all of this, right? Is that we're all saying you should. And this to say you should, insert whatever the should, whatever comes after should is an assumption of an agreement on the truth. And so freedom is bound to, we're just not just going to much time it, truth. It is bound to truth. Because if there isn't something true, there's nothing relative to come from it, right? Not to get all philosophical, right? But that's reality. If there's no such thing as health, I can't talk about decisions in health because nothing governs it, right? So I can't tell somebody you shouldn't or should eat something if there's no such thing as a healthy GI. I just made it up, right? Like, which is what we're often doing, right? Is that we're just like, oh, no, don't eat clementines on Thursday. Okay. Right? But that's what we're doing socially sometimes we don't realize it, right? We're making up stuff and we're agreeing on it and we can make it trendy and we can put up really nice posters, right? And then you can now like get subscriptions and have the best graphic design and be like, no Clementine Thursdays this week coming at you, right? And everyone's gonna be like, oh wow, totes, like, right? Share, right? And then what's governing now more than ever is social law. This is like the era of that, where social law governs more than almost anything. Anyone can get canceled like in a second, right? By rolling, like you were allowed to see you later, right? And it's game over, you just got canceled, right? So, but if we're really free, why couldn't Rowling have an opinion? If we're really free, then why is the consequence of a particular opinion to get canceled? Right? So we're not actually free, right? And the sooner that everybody realizes that reality, then our whole conversation changes, right? But then the conversation becomes on what is freedom and how do I discover it? St. Paul says, St. Paul's a G, okay? Like if people can understand St. Paul in his own language, you'd understand like that guy's like a giant. and he's crazy lit, like brilliant. St. Paul is dropping these one-liners sometimes that people don't realize how big of a deal they were. When St. Paul, and all of the youth, like they memorize it as kids, all things are lawful unto me, but not all things are expedient. And yeah, but actually what St. Paul is saying is, I can do whatever the heck I want. That's actually what he's saying. Okay? He's in the middle of a fight where people were arguing about whether or not to eat foods that had been prayed over, dedicated to the gods, etc. And it caused a whole bunch of strife, and there's elitism and whatever. We'll do that in Bible study. But St. Paul is saying, quite simply, in response to Greek philosophers who are actually very intelligent, I can do whatever I want. Doesn't make it good for me. But good is a relative term referring to an absolute, right? So today when we say, oh, but that's not good for you, it's like, what does that mean? So St. Paul knew what he meant when he would say good. He meant what Jesus said, there is none good but God, so why do you call me good? Are you calling me God? Because he was referring to a standard, right? And it was in relativity to the standard that he could say good or bad, right? If somebody says, oh, I ran 100K in 37 seconds. When someone says, oh, that's really good, they're referring to something, right? Of how possible that is, the laws of human nature, the laws of all this stuff. So that's where it's coming from. And so to bring it back to consequences, what I think most people mean when they're saying freedom is the ability to do something without consequence. Is really more what socially often what it means is. But that's not possible if there's such thing as truth. If there's such thing as truth, then no matter what I do, whether it's social, political, physical, it's circumscript. There is a circle around it. And if there's a circle around it, then I am limited. And the sooner we all realize that, then we'll understand that my freedom is bound by the truth, not because truth is a tyrant, because truth just exists. No other reason. It's that simple, right? And so when we start, for example, having the conversations of, why can't I? Our mindset has to change to that being a real question, not an angry question, right? Because when it's asking, what can I, right? Versus, why can't I? It has to refer to a truth. That's why St. Paul was so different than us, because he was just like, if you can do it, do it. No problem. But if you can't, it's for a reason. It's not because there's like this thing where when if we're telling somebody with diabetes, don't have all this sugar, it's not a punishment, right? Like here's your punishment for diabetes. No more sugar. It's because you have diabetes. It's that simple. Because there's a now, right? That's the point of like last week's thing, the absolute truth to come over here. Because when we start having that mindset, now we can have a dialogue. Because what I'm going to get to eventually is to come back to our humanity and say, if I'm designed, what does that mean? So for example, I could take a table if I wanted, and I can flip it on its side and say, this is the sickest clothes hanger I've ever seen. This is what it is. Could I not do that? I could. I physically can. That's not a problem. But if something is not used according to design, what am I going to see? Problems, because it's not right. Right meaning objective truth. So for example, if I pull out the drawer that's now vertical, The drawer now makes no sense because I'm like, who put this here? Right? Like, how is this helpful? Every time I open it, everything comes falling out. What a stupid drawer. Right? And instead of being like, what a stupid person, you put it on the side, whatever. But then I will also have a problem because the table was designed to bear weight in a particular way. And so if after a certain length of period, I keep on putting this stuff on it, those legs at the end are going to be weak because it was not designed to be that. It was designed to sit in a different way. Okay? Another analogy, because I'm going to use these analogies over and over in the next however many years that I'm here. What is the purpose of a microphone? Thank you. That one was an trick question. It's to amplify sound. What if I were to take the mic and be like, this is the most epic gum holder ever? I just pull out my wads of gum and put it on. What happens to the microphone? Loses function. But could it be used that way? Okay, but would it be able to also amplify sound? Maybe for a bit, right? Maybe for a bit. Eventually, no. And so where I'm going to be going with this is that sometimes when we talk about freedom, freedom to a lot of people means I should be allowed to put gum on my microphone. And to your point, you're like, yes, I can. I can put gum on my microphone. That's why St. Paul was saying, go ahead, you can do whatever you want. But is it good? But is it good? And so the question of good is going to always refer to absolute truth. What is it supposed to be? And so when we talk about sin and virtue, I'm hoping that what we'll start to do is to start looking at it in a completely different way. Where sin is nothing more than going against my design. That's all. It's not a rule book. It's not a list of laws, right? It wasn't that the person who designed the microphone said, I decided that I want no gum on my microphones. No, it was that I was designing a microphone. And a microphone is something. And putting gum on it makes it not work in that way. Sin is putting gum on the microphone. Repentance is saying, I will stop putting gum on the microphone. That's all it is. It's not a touchy-feely thing of how sad you are and woe is me and wrenching your clothes and ashes upon my head. You can do that too, no problem. That's called varying forms of remorse. Sometimes self-loathing, other times. It could be a whole bunch of things. But it's not what repentance is. That's not what the noun is. Okay, repentance is changing your mind. Right? Of saying, oh, I'm mistaken. I'll stop. That's all it is. Right? Whereas like we tend to think it's like this, let me feel filthy and come, right? Like, I'm so bad, I'm so disgusting, I'm so this, or just like, okay, did you stop? Cool. Right? That's all God is asking. Right? God is never asking us to come back and say, we're scumbags, God, we're scumbags. Right? If you want to call yourself that, go for it, no problem. I'm just saying, but don't say it because you think God is telling you that. Right? That's not what he is saying. And so when we start having these discussions about, which is what might be the next one or the one after, about identity, is to come back to that. Right? To come back to what is the purpose of humanity? What is the design of humanity? What does it mean to be a person? Because then when we start talking about good, bad, right, wrong, etc., it becomes a discussion of identity. Christianity is all about identity. Everything about Christianity is about existentialism, actually. It's about my actual existence, not about some random theory. Right? The root of Christian faith is grounded in what we believe to be reality. And I say that what we believe to be because I'm saying that Christianity is a particular interpretation of what we believe to be absolute truth. It can't be arbitrary, right? And so if we're having a discussion about whether to go to the club or not, it can't just be about a list of rules. It has to come back to identity, right? Is it good? Is it good? Right? And so there will be some things that are absolute, and there will be some things that are relative and subjective. There will be. Right? Because how I react to something can also affect differently. And so that's why I think we always will have to start with, is there an absolute truth about this? If yes, answer. If no, then there becomes a second level discussion. What are the factors that affect my decision to do or not do this thing? Right? That becomes the process. And then the freedom, as you guys astutely said, is actually a liberation from something. It is a liberation from wrong identity. It's a liberation from illness. The reward of right is very simple. It's rightness. It's that simple. The reward of good health is that you're healthy. Right? Whereas we often think that that there's this bonus reward system, like if I get down on my knees and I scream a bunch of things at God, that I pass my exam. I don't know where we got that idea from. Okay? God never said that. Right? He never said if you say nice things, I'm gonna get you a really good present. He never said that. Right? Where it was like the reward of living according to the design is the reward itself. It's like the person who is losing weight, right, starts to feel happy that they are not out of breath, as we talked about, as they're going up the stairs, right? And that they're like, oh, now I'm able to go for a run. Run wasn't a reward, it's a consequence. And sickness isn't a punishment, it's a consequence. It's very important that we get the right terminology. Because once we start getting into the language of like crime, punishment, reward, then what becomes justice? We're seeing the effect socially. Justice, instead of being making things right, which is what real justice is, justification literally means the making right, orthogonal. Instead, justice becomes about vindication, revenge. It changes tones, right? Where justice becomes that the punishment fits the crime. So we're going to be talking a little bit also of history of saying that when religion started to speak the language of secular society, the punishment fit the crime, we warped God. We warped God. We warped God to a human reality instead of who he is, his own existence. Right? So freedom actually becomes the ability to be as one ought to be. That's all it is. And the reason why God endowed us with freedom, which is a fast forward, is so simple. Freedom is the only thing that a human possesses that allows him or her to love. If I don't have a choice, I am incapable of loving. And because God's identity is love, and we're in his image and likeness, I wouldn't be in his image and likeness if I don't have the potentiality to love. It is only in my choosing something and not choosing something else that I'm showing this value. And you're choosing to marry one person and not everyone else, you're saying, I value you particularly. I choose you. In choosing one meal over another, you're saying, as simple as a meal is, I like this, right? And that's why in the early language of society, primitive language, love and hate didn't mean the things that we make them mean today. That's why God could say things like, Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated, and still be God. Or why God could say, unless you hate father, mother, brother, sister, you're not worthy of me. Because all it meant was the thing that I didn't choose. That's all. It didn't come with it the other nouns and adjectives we have now, contempt, despising, all these things. That, with the evolution of language, came to mean those things too. But biblically, all it meant was, I chose Jacob. I chose Jacob for a covenant, and I didn't choose Esau. And when he's saying to us, choose, don't hate family, etc., God doesn't hate them in the social sense, or he would have invented them. He's saying, choose me first. Why? Because I'm the truth. That's all. It's an existential issue. Because family has meaning relative to truth. So if you don't know what family means, right, you're not going to use it right? It's the equivalent of him saying, you want to eat chocolate? Okay, you're allowed to eat chocolate. You want to have these things, but choose health first. Let health govern how you eat. Let health govern how you insert whatever it is here. God is saying, let truth govern how you exist. That's all that's being said. Any questions, comments, feedback, clarifications? Peter?
Where does the higher, I don't say higher,
No, I believe it exists. I'm just saying that's not defined freedom based on levels of freedom.
but yeah, but I'm like in terms of, so I limit my freedom for the sake of the truth, or to choose something that is good. But does that not also result in another kind of freedom after? Or where does freedom come in? Like, what role does it play after that decision?
I'm not sure I know or care, and I don't mean that sarcastically, in the sense that if my goal is truth, freedom almost becomes irrelevant when it's not being assigned to truth.
But like Christ himself said, you know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So
Yes.
there's a freedom from actually choosing.
Yeah, from disease.
Yeah. So there is a certain kind of freedom that results from choosing truth.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The reward of health is health. Right? So freedom, when used towards truth, just means that you now experience the joy of truth. The liberation is from living a lie. Right? So for example, I have my disease. I could argue that freedom would be that I could eat whatever I want. Or I could also view that my not eating these foods that make me sick has liberated me from illness.
But it's another kind of freedom.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. It becomes an issue of what is real freedom. Real freedom is truth. Good question. Gucci? Sorry. So there's like, I don't mean to be annoying. I hope that my style is not pissing everyone off. But eventually we'll have again, to get back to it, to then say, okay, well then what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be a Christian? Right? Why believe in this? And then if that is the case, because then you'll understand how to live. Right? I think that too many Christians are bound by what they perceive to be a list of very Islamic, like haram and halal, right? Of permitted and non-permitted, right? And that when we live in that space, it develops negative emotions, right? It becomes like a very this is so stupid, right? And then there's an even bigger issue, I think, particularly in Orthodoxy, because Orthodoxy is so tied to a lot of ethnicities historically, is that what ends up happening is that we don't know how to differentiate a cultural norm from a religious one. And so then we don't know how to navigate that, because we start talking about right and wrong when something is a cultural issue, not a religious one, and vice versa, right? Where it's like, okay, dating has a cultural thing around it. Sex has a religious one, right? And so when we start mixing languages, right, then we start getting really confused, right? Or it's just like, you have long hair, that's wrong. And saying, no, it's not. That is not intrinsically wrong. The decision making behind growing my hair as a guy or not could have right and wrong associated with my motives. But the act of growing my hair is not wrong, or I wouldn't be able to grow my hair, right? So it's like we need to be able to come back to that. But what we need to understand is, what is the that we're pointing at, right? And that's the point of these first talks, is to really ingrain in us, what is it that we're pointing at when we talk about whatever it is that we're talking about. It has to come back to truth. And once we're in that discussion, everything is so simple. So simple. Not necessarily easy, but so intellectually simple. Because God is simple. He really, really is. Nancy.
I like what you said, that it comes down to love when we speak the truth. But we often speak it out of fear too, even in the simple things, like we choose to eat or not to eat things out of fear, anyway, health reasons, whatever, right? With God too, sometimes.
Mhm.
How do we switch that fear to the right way of thinking, the freedom way of thinking, to love?
Knowledge and experience, both. Right? So I don't have a problem if somebody is originally making the right decision for the wrong motive. It's not perfection, it's not preferred, but it's not like if somebody eats healthy by accident, they're still going to benefit from good health, right? If somebody's eating healthy because they're afraid of getting sick, they're still going to benefit from eating well. It's just that the sooner that they can eat healthy for the sake of health, the better, right? And they'll also have a truer freedom because they'll know how to eat, right? Because then it won't be like, oh, no, I can't. Once they understand calories in, calories out, metabolism, blah, 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 right? Then they're like, yeah, we're good. I went for a run. I can have this. It's okay, right? It's just that they will now be more and more governed by truth. So the Desert Fathers talk about what you're talking about, where they're saying there's like basically 3 levels of faith or faithfulness is probably a better way of saying it, where there are people who do good because they're afraid of going to hell. Because those are slaves. Because they're still saved. It's not like they're bad people. He's like, but those are in the status of slaves. They do things out of fear of punishment. Level 2 is what the Desert Fathers call the level of the servant, or the faithful servant, a hired servant, a paid servant. This person is doing good because they want to get the paycheck. So it's the Christian who's like, I will do this because I want to go to heaven. The highest level is that of the child, the son or the daughter, who does it out of love. So it's not a problem that within our lives we're going to go through those stages, and it won't be shocking if we even oscillate ourselves within some of these in different times of our life. No problem. And that's what I'm saying, let the discussion always be about the truth, the objective, versus the subject. Because when we focus everything on the subject, we're not in the realm of truth, and we're never going to arrive at anything real. Sorry, I thought something had up here. Sick buzz. With regards to the survey and the meeting, so many of you were at the meeting on Friday. So the survey was awesome. Thank you guys like immensely. Like 60, as of this morning, 64 filled it out, which was legit. It was very clear that everybody was down for only one meeting. They don't need to have multiple. So the plan for now, I'm supposed to go, I don't know if it's still going to happen because of COVID. I'm supposed to go back to Cali, to my home diocese for a few months a year. So that was supposed to happen in November. I don't know if that's going to get canceled now because of COVID or not, and then return. So for now, because St. Mark's needed a meeting for various reasons and geography for people or whatever, I will be doing the last Sunday of every month on Sunday. I will be at St. Mary's. And so that would be next week. So if you guys are down with it, every Friday at St. Mark's is going to be Vespers at 6, and then every other week is going to be a meeting. The in-between weeks are going to be social night and community service night. So I might do the next part of this series on Friday at St. Mark's because of St. Mary's. The long-term plan, and I don't mean long-term as in like in a year, I mean like hopefully within the next couple of months, is that there might be a division between the university group and the graduate group. And then we'll have like a stable, like always every week is this day for the grads based on the survey, what days you guys do prefer, which is most likely going to still be Sunday. And then the university crew will have their own, so they can have the freedom as well to dialogue and speak their language, because there's a good number of them, because I think it can be intimidating to people much older than you that think differently. And I think it would be fair to them to have that. And then I will also have a public calendar. I want to say for that, where everything's just up in one place. I will communicate everything in the group. So the survey is being used. It wasn't useless. And we're going to have like the stable date. I'm going to be reaching out to you guys to see who wants to help out with community service organization, and who wants to help out with maybe organizing like social nights, because I don't want us to once it's social week to the night before, so what are we doing, and then nobody knows, and then nobody goes. So if we already know what it is, it's way easier to come out. But the survey, I think, was already evident from what you guys were already doing, which was cool. So all of that will follow online shortly. I'll shoot out the links in why we are sinners. And then what I was going to also ask you, so that we're not spamming every single group in existence, I will usually just communicate something why we are sinners, and then to the church specific group that is affected, right? So if the talk is at SMSP, then I will put in why we are sinners in that. And then if anybody knows that other people are not getting something forwarded to every walk, so we're not spamming like crazy. Any?
Next week, Sunday is meeting at St. Mary's continuation of the stop.
So next week I'm going to be with the high schoolers there. So basically the day that I'm at St. Mary's, I won't go through the older group for now. And that's what I'm saying. When my mission at St. Mark's is concluded, things will be a lot easier. The issue right now is that because I've been given two responsibilities, a temporary one for St. Mark's and a permanent one for this, I'm trying to navigate that. And so so I don't have the freedom to just keep going wherever I want. So next week won't be. Are you guys okay with Friday night this week being at St. Mark's as a continuation? Come November, there will be a static thing. It won't be this constant moving thing. Because I really appreciate that all of you guys said that you're willing to move around. I actually really, really, really appreciate that. But I also, if we don't need to, then we won't. We'll figure it all out. We don't want to just do it for the sake of doing it. For those of you who are down in the children's gym for a bit, we're not watch Lord Williams if you guys are down, because we were talking about that last week. Dining room. If you guys are down, if you're not in the mood for moving, you just want to hang out and chill, that's cool too. And I also really want to say, I'm not being cheesy. You guys are legit. I wasn't expecting such a warm welcome in Vancouver. I thought there was going to be this 2-month warming period. But everyone has been so friendly and kind. You guys are awesome. So thank you guys for being awesome and for being so nice to me. Oh, I didn't check if there was any questions on here. No questions. Sick buzz. Hi, friends. Okay. All right. Any announcements, anything from the crew here, or should we pray in Bizarros? I guess we're praying in Bizarros. Okay. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Lord, make us ready to pray with all thanksgiving. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but evil, in Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and glory forever. Amen. Love of God the Father, grace of the God and Son, the communion and the gift of the Spirit, who all go in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you all. Where's the bathroom? Okay, I'll get my stuff after.
Down the hall of Una.
It's not